Hi everyone, thank you for joining us this afternoon. My name's Zoe and I work at the Reading Agency, which is a national charity that tackles life's biggest challenges through the proven power of reading. Over the years 2019 to 2020, we reached 1.9 million people across all of our programmes. And one of those programmes is the Teachers Reading Challenge, which we run each year in partnership with the Open University, and which we're very excited to have the support of Pearson on this year as well. So I'll be speaking a bit more about the Teachers Reading Challenge later, because right now I'm going to be speaking to teacher and head of English, Hayley Andrews, who we're very happy to have joining us. And we're going to be talking about the importance of diverse and inclusive books in the mission to get more children and young people reading for pleasure, which is at the heart of everything that both the Reading Agency and Pearson does. So the event will be focusing mainly on key stages 3 to 4, but I expect a lot of the discussion will be relevant to teachers of different year groups, as well as other school staff and librarians as well. So please don't worry if you're not a secondary school teacher, because I'm sure you'll find lots of useful information in the discussion. We'll be ending the discussion with a short audience Q&A. So if you have a question at any point during the discussion for Hayley, then you can just put it in the comments on Facebook and we'll get round to as many of them as we can at the end. So I am delighted to welcome Hayley Andrews. Hayley Andrews is Head of English at the Turing House School in Teddington in London. She's worked on diversifying the English curriculum at Turing House School and has given talks for Pearson, Edexcel and Penguin on the importance of diversity in literature. She was part of the first cohort of teachers to teach Mallory Blackman's Boys Don't Cry at GCSE, and she recently helped review the new Collins Snap Provision book for that title. So welcome, Hayley, and thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
So I just wanted to start off by asking you to expand a little bit on what I mentioned there about you being one of the first teachers to teach Boys Don't Cry. So what was it that made you decide to introduce that text into your syllabus?
Yeah, we were already really conscious that all of the set texts at GCSE were written by white writers, and most of them male and not even alive anymore. And so we were really excited when Pearson released the new text options that introduced kind of, I think there are 5 new text options that we could choose from. And have that as part of our course. We were really excited by that. Boys Don't Cry really just attracted us because it's so modern and relevant and really feels relatable to our students. So for those of you who don't know, Boys Don't Cry, the story of a boy who he starts off at the beginning, he's waiting for his A-level results, and instead of before they arrive in the post, his ex-girlfriend turns up on the doorstep and comes in and she has a baby, and it turns out that the baby is his, and then she disappears without a trace and he's left there figuring out what on earth to do with this baby that he's just realized is his. And then alongside that, we've also got the story of his brother Adam, who you soon discover is gay, and he himself is very happy with that, but the people around him respond differently to that. So there's just, it's such a great story, and we found it so relevant and so engaging for our students. So we were just so excited to be able to teach that at GCSE. Yeah,
it sounds like a brilliant book. So as you kind of covered there, Boys Don't Cry tackles a lot of really important issues head on, kind of including racism and homophobia. And research published recently by Penguin and the Runnymede Trust reveals that some teachers have kind of a bit of trepidation about teaching texts that address these kind of issues because they fear they might lack the knowledge or maybe the personal experience to kind of teach them. So how did you approach the teaching of these texts in your school?
Yeah, I totally understand that concern, and I think it is really important that we discuss these issues and don't sweep them under the carpet, and we need to be sensitive about them and be quite careful about the discussions that we have. But I think, you know, lots of us already teach books that have elements of racism or sexism or other issues in them, and I think there's no difference here. And I think, you know, part of it is about setting up that sort of atmosphere in your classroom of, you know, we're gonna be mature about the discussions we have. We're going to deal with some sensitive topics in our discussions. We need to be respectful of each other's viewpoints. We need to remember that not all of us are going going to agree on everything. But I think also it's worth remembering that the discussions that we have we're not inviting students really to tell us whether they disagree or agree with anything. We're asking them to think about what these characters reveal to us about that society, about our modern society, or the society that the book is set in, and what the writer's intentions are and what the writer's trying to tell us. So I think that if the conversations are focused on that, it can take away some of that uncertainty, I think, that some teachers feel.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a really important point about kind of like prefacing any discussions with an initial discussion about like how it's going to work and kind of expectations and maybe boundaries. I think that's a really important thing to bear in mind. And actually just wanted to mention as well, for teachers who kind of like using these texts in class that tackle these kind of big issues, who are looking for resources to support their teaching as well. One of the programs that the Reading Agency runs is Chatterbooks, which is the UK's largest network of children's reading groups. And on the Chatterbooks website, we have a whole host of resources that includes things like reading guides, teacher notes, classroom activities for a whole range of diverse and inclusive books. And we also have the Reading Hacks resources page, which is aimed at students who are a little bit older, so kind of key stage 3 to 4 age. And that's a really great resource if you're looking for materials to support your discussions in the classroom. So you also made the decision to swap Of Mice and Men, which I, like many people, remember studying at school, for The Dark Lady by Akala. And you said you did this because the text that you were studying at the time, so Of Mice and Men and also To Kill a Mockingbird, both of them kind of focused mainly on Black characters as victims. So why is it important, do you think, that children who are Black, Asian or minority ethnic, or indeed from any minority group, see positive representations of characters that they can identify with?
Yeah, I think it's really, really important to read text written by Black, Asian and minority ethnic writers, which have BAME characters, and also where the story is not entirely focused on their race. I think, with Of Mice and Men, which we were teaching before, and To Kill a Mockingbird, as you say, we just started to feel a bit uncomfortable about obviously the language in those books, but also this kind of Black victim, and with To Kill a Mockingbird as well, this kind of white savior narrative. And I think it is a really difficult balance, because you don't want to erase history, and you want students to know about the history of racism, but I think it's just so important for that not to be the only thing that they experience. If there's only one book on your curriculum that has Black characters in it and they're victims, then we're not telling the whole story, are we? So I think that's why it's really important. The Dark Lady is such a great book. It came out this year, so it's brand new. And something that I love about it is Henry, the main character. He is Black, but that's not his whole character. There's so much else that goes on with him. So that there are elements where we do learn about the way that he's treated because of the colour of his skin, but we also look at his relationship with others. We look at it deals with his class and how he's treated because of that, and there's a whole lot of kind of character development and things to do with his identity and his upbringing, and I think there's so much more than just his Blackness, and I think that's the kind of book that we should be reading. So we don't keep telling that kind of one story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's so many books that are about moments of kind of celebration and joy as well, and achievement in the histories of different cultural and racial groups as well. There's a lot of kind of sadness, but as much as that, there is a lot to celebrate, and it's really important those books have a place in schools as well, definitely. Yeah. What you mentioned there about The Dark Lady being a very new text actually kind of ties into my next question, which is, so some of the kind of main challenges that schools face when they're thinking about introducing new texts into their syllabus is that they maybe don't have the budget to buy a whole set of new books, or if it is a very new text, there might not be as many resources available, or just the capacity to develop new lesson plans. So what kind of tips do you maybe have for schools who are kind of approaching changing their syllabus?
Yeah, budget is a really difficult one. I think the thing is, this is something that I think is gaining momentum, and I think more and more people are realizing how important it is that we do offer a diverse curriculum. And so I think school leaders aren't going to be able to ignore it for much longer. So I'd say if there isn't money in the budget currently, I think we as teachers need to be pushing back on that and saying, well, why not? Because this is a really important thing. In terms of kind of more practical things, there's a lot of Facebook groups and Twitter pages where people can sell or swap text that they no longer need. And then there's lots of websites that you can buy kind of cheaper copies of text. Lots of places do discounts for schools. I did a lot of shopping on Scholastic, which has like a rewards program. So you build up rewards, and then I managed to get a whole class set for free because I bought other class sets. So yeah, budget is a really tricky one, and those are just a few ideas, and I hope that those are helpful to everyone. In terms of the other part of your question, so kind of capacity to build new schemes of work and create resources. I think Good Boys Don't Cry and the other texts that Edexcel offer at GCSE, Edexcel has some amazing materials on their website, and they've kind of made it as easy as they can for schools to take on these texts. So there's loads of training materials, there's kind of schemes of work that you can adapt for your own school, and there's also, which is really helpful, like example student responses with examiner comments, so you know that you're teaching the right things, you know that you're kind of on the right line, so they're really helpful. And then I think, other websites like LitDrive is one that I really love, where teachers go on and share their resources for free, which is great. Teach It is another one that I think is really good. And yeah, I think getting on Twitter and Facebook and kind of sharing ideas with others and sharing resources with others is a really great way of lessening the workload and helping the educational community as well.
Brilliant, thank you. I was just going to say as well, we will be sharing a recording of this on the Summer Reading Challenge Facebook, so don't worry about scribbling everything down, because you'll be able to go back and hear all these really great references. I was actually just going to take the opportunity to say as well that on the Chatterbooks website, we work with our publisher partners to offer schools and libraries free sets of books for their school or library reading group. So even if it's not for part of your academic study, if you have a reading group in your school for kind of extracurricular reading, the Chatterbooks website is a really great way to get free sets of books to read with your entire class, and there's a whole range of text there for different age groups. And I just also wanted to mention actually Pearson's Lit in Colour Pioneers programme, which they're delivering with Penguin Random House UK and the Runnymede Trust, which is a think tank focusing on diversity in education. So over 100 GCSE and A-level cohorts are taking part in the inaugural programme this year. And as part of that, they'll be receiving free access to copies of the chosen set texts, free resources, including CPD training webinars for teachers and librarians, support programmes of work for each set text, a Lit in Colour mini library, and also involvement in a student ambassador programme. So the application window for this year's programme has sadly closed, but you can still access plenty of support and information from about diversifying curriculum through Penguin's website, Pearson's website and Penguin's website. So please do check those out. Right, so next I was just going to ask, so whilst the syllabus changes can often take a bit longer to implement, reading for pleasure and reading more widely can still be encouraged in the classroom on a day-to-day basis. So how do you encourage children to read for pleasure beyond what they're studying at school?
Yeah, I think this is a huge challenge, especially at secondary school. So when I became the head of department at Turing House, there were a few things that I put into place to make reading for pleasure kind of have sort of center stage. So the first thing is that we have some double lessons in our school. So we decided that 20 minutes of those double lessons would be dedicated to silent reading, and obviously you can choose when that would work for you, and depending on your timetabling. But I think the important thing with that is students have choice on what they're reading. We have books that we lend to them, and they don't just come in and pick up a book and pretend to read it for 20 minutes and then leave it on the shelf. If they borrow a book, they take it home and they read it in their own time as well. And the other important thing about that silent reading is that the teachers are really involved in that. So we have we call them reading conversations with our students. So we would pick some students and take that time to have a quiet 2 or 3 minute conversation with that student, just going through what they're reading, whether they're enjoying it, and then we can make suggestions for them and give encouragement to them about their reading. We can also link that to their reading levels as well. So telling them, well, actually your reading age is a little bit under, so it'd be really good if you carried on with this habit at home, or praising them for saying, wow, your reading is amazing, and it's really reflected in your reading age, which is way above your actual age. So there's lots of ways that we can do that and make sure that it's really important to the students as well as to us. We also set reading homeworks, and we have a reading log that students have to fill in and get parents to sign. So parents are a little bit more involved in that and aware of what the homework is. I think there's more that we can be doing there in terms of involving parents. I think that's a big one that primary schools do really well, and secondary schools we're not so well. Speaking for myself, we're not so good at that. So I think that's something that I'll be looking at next year. And I think just the biggest thing that I've found that's made a real impact on encouraging children to read for pleasure is giving personal recommendations. So I've given assemblies in the past, for World Book Day or other events, or even just in lessons when I've said, hey, I've read this really great book, I think you'd really enjoy it if you like this, and I think you'd find it really relevant. And I think I've been really surprised before with the amount of students who've come to me afterwards, and people who I wouldn't have thought were readers coming and saying, oh miss, I read that book you recommended. And I think personal recommendations have the biggest impact in my experience.
Yeah, that must be really nice when a child comes up to you and says they've read the book you recommended and they really loved it. Or if they didn't, it's just about starting a conversation, and for them to be able to voice their opinions give them a lot of confidence. So I think that's really lovely. So I think, as you kind of touched on a little bit then, but children often experience a dip in their reading levels when they transition from primary to secondary school. And I was just wondering your thoughts on how diverse and inclusive reading lists can kind of help combat this dip as they make that transition.
Yeah, so I think there is definitely a dip when students move into year 7. And I think something I've been really conscious of is that we've got a real opportunity as secondary school teachers to grab them in year 7 when they're still avid readers and keep that habit up and keep it going. So I think, the way that primary schools are really good at involving parents in their homework and their reading, and also just kind of having an expectation that the students will be reading every day. I think there's lots that we can do to keep that going when they're in year 7. And I think, like anything, we watch TV shows that we're interested in, we go and see movies that we're interested in. Students are much more likely to open a book and read it if it's relevant to them and they can relate to it, and they're interested in it. So I think it goes back to the idea of sharing recommendations that are relevant to all of our students, and if we have students from different backgrounds and we're only recommending books with certain characters, or with written only by white men, for example, which tends to be the case, unfortunately, then perhaps they will be less inclined to pick it up and read it. And I think the other thing I wanted to say about this is I really have tried to promote books in year 7 that promote being really inclusive and being really kind, and helping students develop their empathy. So I think lots of primaries or lots of year 7 teachers recommend books like Wonder and The Boy at the Back of the Class, which I think are really lovely books for developing students' kind of empathy and kind of that anti-bullying and kindness thing that we want them all to have.
Definitely, yeah, and they're both great titles, those two. So we've kind of spoken about children who are maybe kind of already interested in reading and enjoy reading, but not all children are kind of intuitive readers. Some, for a variety of reasons, may be reluctant readers or less confident readers. And of course, some children have learning difficulties such as dyslexia, which can make reading kind of a bit more challenging. So how do you ensure that these children can enjoy reading as much as everybody else in a kind of full classroom setting?
So there's obviously really practical things that we can do. So lots of books have dyslexia friendly versions of them. You can use reading screens, which are like little kind of sheets of plastic that are translucent and different colours, and some students find those really useful. And I think again about developing habits in the classroom, that there's no shame in using those. It's really normal and natural, and that's fine. I think audiobooks are something that are really they're such a great resource, and maybe we don't use enough. We don't use those enough. So reading a text alongside an unabridged audio version is a great way of supporting those students who maybe are reluctant readers. And then I think the other thing in the classroom is that I do a lot of reading out loud to students. I think it's really important that that teachers read out loud to their students, and I think yes, get the students reading out loud as well. I think that's important too. But teachers reading out loud, we can read it in a way that I guess builds interest and doesn't kind of slow the pace of the reading. And then I think lastly, I think it's just about reminding students and kind of being a bit infectious about the joy that reading can create. I think I love reading, it's such a pleasure, but often students find it a chore, but actually when they get into a book they do fall in love with it. And I think it's just about recommending books again, and getting students to recommend books to each other, and creating that sort of atmosphere of excitement around books, I think can be really infectious.
Definitely, 100% agree. So COVID and the resulting lockdowns have had a big impact on children's school attainment and mental health, and of course that of school staff as well. So how can reading for pleasure be used to tackle these issues?
Well, firstly, there's loads of evidence, isn't there, that reading for pleasure promotes self-esteem, and it even helps you sleep better. I think there was something about, I think I'm getting this right, you'll forgive me if I get it wrong, but it's something like adults who read regularly report to be like 20% happier, more satisfied with their lives, which is staggering, isn't it? So I think, reading for pleasure clearly has a really big impact on on mental health. And I think at the moment there's quite a lot of focus, isn't there, on kind of well-being, and especially kind of as a result of lockdown, people are making an effort to do things for their own well-being, and I think reading is a part of that. Reading is relaxing, and it benefits adults and children, so I think reading kind of comes under that well-being idea. And then in terms of kind of helping with students' attainment, there's been lots of worries and concerns about how students' attainment is going to dip as a result of all the lost learning because of the lockdowns. And I think we need to remember that literacy is a key to all of the other subjects that students study as well. Lots of exams, lots of GCSE for exams, for example, for other subjects have spelling, punctuation and grammar marks attached to them, and students who read widely are much more likely to be better at SPAG. So I think it's about literacy helping with their achievement across all their subjects, not just in English. And even I think there was some research recently into textbooks used at GCSE across, I think geography was the example that was given, but across subjects. And the reading age of these GCSE textbooks was 16, 17, 18 years old, which is a real challenge for a GCSE student. So if we're teaching literacy and promoting reading, which obviously improves literacy, then we're helping with students' attainment across the board.
Yeah, no, that's all really interesting. Thank you. So again, we kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of kind of schools working with families, but in its annual literacy survey, the National Literacy Trust reported that a third of children they surveyed were reading more during lockdown than they had been pre-lockdown, with children's enjoyment of reading increasing in that same time frame. So how do you think teachers can work with families to build on this increased regularity and enjoyment of reading that we've seen kind of during the last kind of year or so?
Yeah, it's really encouraging, isn't it? That's really, really encouraging that it's increased. I think we are, as teachers and as organisations who are trying to get children to read more, we're competing with the draw and the kind of addictive nature of social media, and all the other distractions and things that students will do or children will do before picking up a book. So I think part of it, we can be a little bit clever about it and use social media to promote books. And I think there's some great Instagram accounts that I've seen from authors and from kind of other organisations that do reading clubs online and things like that. So I think we can kind of use that as a way. And then I think another thing that I'm really conscious of is that I don't think all parents and students are aware of how amazing the resource is of their local library, and how it's completely free, obviously, and they don't even have to step inside a library. They offer a huge range of ebooks and audiobooks. Most libraries, I think, have an app that you can download and access them on there. I certainly do for my local library, and I think it's about helping parents and students navigate that and make sure they have access to that, which I think can have a big impact, can't it? And then I think one thing that we did, for example, this year was during lockdown we ran a 1 million word challenge. So we challenged students to read 1 million words in time for World Book Day, and we started it, so it gave them about 6 weeks to do that. So just to give you an idea, 1 million words is roughly all the Harry Potter books. So to read that in 6 weeks is quite an achievement.
Yeah.
And we were really excited by the response from students and the uptake on that, and lots of them said that they'd love to do it again. So I think in a non-lockdown situation we might give them a bit longer, but it's definitely something we want to continue and do each year. Even for the older year groups, you could give it to students to just get done in an academic year, and recommend books for them to read. And I think that would be a really good way of kind of keeping them motivated to keep reading.
Definitely, absolutely. I'm really glad you mentioned public libraries as well, because they're just a fantastic space to use, especially during the summer holidays. When kids are at home and maybe a bit restless and looking for things to do, the library is a brilliant place to go and discover new books. And I also just wanted to mention the Summer Reading Challenge Home Zone. So the Summer Reading Challenge is the reading agency's main programme for children, which kind of goes up to the lower age of secondary school. On the website, that includes a lot of free guidance and activities to support families in choosing the books they read with their children, reading for pleasure together at home, and talking about books together. And includes resources from places like the National Deaf Children's Society and Parentkind. So I will pop a link to that as well in the comments afterwards. I'm actually just going to jump ahead a little bit, just because I want to make sure we can fit in all the questions. So I just wanted to ask if you have some favourite books that you would like to suggest that include characters and narratives that reflect the diverse student readership that we have, as well as titles by authors and illustrators maybe less represented in children's literature.
Yes, I've got some, and I've got some props with me. So
lovely.
This is The Dark Lady by Carla, which is the one that we're starting to teach. It's fantastic. 100% go and read it. In terms of, so I've got two more that I think would be brilliant to teach. So The Boxer by Nikesh Shukla. Really great. I think it appeals to boys and girls. It's about a boy who gets into boxing as a way of coping with stuff that's going on at home. And I think that's a great one, and I would totally teach this and might introduce it to our curriculum at some point in the future. The other one that I think would be great to teach is Purple Hibiscus. I think this is a great one. It's kind of coming of age, and it goes back to the idea of it's not just about someone's race, it's about kind of her growing up and figuring things out. So I think that would be a really great one to teach. And then in terms of just kind of reading and recommending to students, I just finished this. Not usually what I would read, because it's a bit magical realism-y, but Catching Teller Crow, it's told by a girl who's dead, so that's an interesting perspective there. And it's set in Australia. She's Aborigine Australian. Run Rebel, I'm reading at the moment. You can see I'm halfway through. This is a really great one. It's a novel in verse. I'll just show you. I don't know if you guys can see, but it's a novel in verse, so that's a really good one. And then I also have some that I would recommend for older readers as well. So for teachers or for sixth formers, Girl, Woman, Other, I just loved. I thought it was brilliant. And My Sister the Serial Killer was great fun. I actually listened to this on audiobook and it was hilarious. Yeah, so there's a whole stack of suggestions there. Let me just look on my list and see if there's any others. Oh, Black Flamingo, I don't have it with me, but I read that one. I think that was on the Carnegie shortlist last year, I think, and that was a brilliant one as well. And then just a couple for other kinds of, other aspects of being inclusive. There is George by, I think it's by someone called Alex Gino, and My Brother's Name is Jessica by, I think it's by John Boyne. I'll check and make sure I've got that right. So both of those deal with kind of LGBT issues and have been really popular with our students.
Lovely, thank you. So many great titles in there. And just to say, we will be writing these out afterwards because there was lots of great recommendations in there. I do have a couple of my own recommendations, but before I do those, please, if anyone has any more questions, please do just pop them in the comments because we'll be moving on to the audience Q&A in just a few moments. But my kind of like personal favourite recommendations for the kind of Key Stage 3 to 4 age group, I'd say High Rise Mystery by Shana Jackson, which is a brilliant book set on a housing estate in South London, and two sisters kind of set out to solve a crime that happens, and it's just really pacey and fun. The Henna Wars by Adiba Jagirda, which also is about kind of like LGBT experiences, and then Show Us Who You Are by Elle McNichol, which is a brilliant book focusing on a neurodivergent female lead character. So they're my kind of like 3 top reads that I'd recommend. And then just in terms of other places to kind of find books, the Reading Agency produces monthly book lists for younger children and older children on a different theme each month, and you can find that on our resources page. Actually, the other question that I kind of skipped over quickly was about kind of your go-to places for discovering new books, because kind of teachers and library staff are so busy and often feel that they just don't have the time to kind of like research and find these titles. So what are your kind of tips for discovering new books, and do you have any kind of like go-to places?
Yes, so 2 things in particular. So someone who I follow on Twitter who I think is amazing, she tweets at Funky Pedagogy. I think her name's Jennifer Webb, and she has on her website something called the Reading List Project, where teachers share recommendations of books that they have enjoyed or books they think would be great for teaching. And there's a whole host of books on there, and people have put really helpful comments on about what the themes are and why, which classes they think it would work for. And so that's where I got lots of my ideas from. Twitter in general is a great resource for kind of throwing things out there, asking for suggestions, and often people are really helpful on there. And then the trust that my school is a part of, Russell Education Trust, have produced a reading list, which is I think it's on your website, on the Reading Agency website, and it has lots of books suggestions, not just for English teachers, but for teachers of any subject. So it's a great one to share with colleagues for books that might be relevant to their subjects that they can recommend in their lessons as well.
Lovely. Yeah, thank you. Just to kind of add to that, so the Teachers Reading Challenge, which I kind of mentioned at the start, supports school and library staff to widen their repertoire of contemporary children's texts and also to develop their understanding of reading for pleasure pedagogy. So participants taking part in the challenge, which kicked off last week, invited to set themselves a reading target for the summer holiday and then to demonstrate how they kind of applied what they've learned about reading for pleasure in their classroom. So there's lots of ways to discover new texts through the challenge, and we have a top 100 books feature that shows the most popular books being read by people taking part in the challenge, and so that's updated on a regular basis so you can see which are kind of in the top spot, and it also shares hundreds of reviews from teachers and librarians as well. And then we have so I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. We have the message board, which is where people taking part in the challenge can kind of put out questions to other participants if they're looking for a particular title dealing with a specific subject or a book that's kind of best for less confident readers. They can put out questions on there, and it's a really supportive and welcoming community where you can have lots of other people in the industry sharing their thoughts as well. And also, just to mention, Pearson and Penguin have the Lit in Colour book list, which is also available on the Teachers Reading Challenge website. So thank you so much for that discussion. That was really great. We do have a few questions which have come in, so I'm just going to read them out from Facebook. And again, if you have any more, please do add them. So Kimberly asks, are there any other texts you'd love to study with your class that you think should be on the syllabus? You've mentioned a lot already, so if there's any other ones that you've got.
Gosh, well, the ones that I showed are the ones that I've read so far. There's others that are on my reading list, and I think I was at another webinar that Penguin, the Lit in Colour program, put on recently, and they were talking about how often it's novels that are taught that have kind of BAME voices within them, and less so with poetry and play. So I think that's something I'll be looking at, but I don't know any yet. The only other one that I've got is the Hillwood Fly, which is the inauguration poem, which I think is a great one. And so I think that would be a really great one to teach. And I think she did a brilliant BBC interview all about the process of writing the poem, and so that would be a lovely teaching moment to read the poem, and then also maybe to get students thinking about their own poems and what things they would like to say.
Yeah, thank you. I think poetry as well is a really, really great one to kind of like introduce in classrooms as well and get kids really excited about. So Yvette has asked, if you could recommend one diverse book to introduce for Key Stage 3, which would you recommend suitable for Year 7 and 8? So maybe out of all those that you've spoken about, if you could pick one, particularly for that age group.
So I think I will probably go with The Boxer, this one again. So I'm not sure about Year 7, to be honest, but I think Year 8 is where I would probably place it for us. So I think the reason I love it is it's kind of all about his journey with boxing, and it's kind of split into two sort of time frames. So across the whole novel is this you get little snippets of this one boxing match that he's having with an opponent, and you get little snippets of it as you go through, and then the main narrative is him kind of dealing with, he was a victim of a racist attack, and it's him kind of dealing with that and getting over that and figuring out friendships with people and life at home and his relationship with his mom and his dad who's unwell. So there's loads in there, loads of really contemporary issues, and it feels relevant and interesting, and I think really relatable. So yeah, I think that would be a great one, and obviously The Dark Lady as well, because that's what we've chosen. It's also a great option.
Brilliant, thank you. They both sound like really exciting books. So Kimberly has also asked, how do you build a reading culture across the school as a whole, and if possible at home?
So I think I think it's got to be, firstly, you've got to get buy-in from your teaching team, and from students. And I think it's about doing lots and lots of things that that kind of come together to promote reading for pleasure. So, you know, some of the things that I mentioned before, like setting reading homeworks, that's a really easy one. Creating reading logs for students to fill in and parents to sign automatically involves parents, and makes them a bit more aware of what their son or daughter is reading. I think, you know, if possible, you know, we're all so much better now, aren't we, after lockdown, at doing online events. So if possible, something that I'd really like to do next year is give a talk to our parents about the importance of reading, and talk them through some of the research about how much reading can have an impact on their child's, you know, development and attainment. And so I think, you know, involving parents can be something that's really key to create that reading culture. You know, I think embedding reading habits into lessons across the department is a really important one. And something that I don't think I mentioned that we've done is reading in tutor time as well. So instead of having silent reading in tutor time, we've got set texts for our tutor groups to read together, rather than each of them reading a different book. They'll all read it together and then they can discuss it. And we've chosen, so that's where we've used George, and my brother's name is Jessica, because those, I think, are really great books to discuss. You know, they're quite nice and short, and they're great to discuss with other people. So, you know, I think doing lots of those things, you know, and even things like displays around the school as well, and assemblies, and things like that, I think can all come together to create that sort of reading culture around the school. I hope that helps.
Lovely, thank you. Yeah, really brilliant kind of tips and advice in there. So I think that's it for questions. Though Ashley has just kind of commented to say that Topside is brilliant for researching new books. So that's another recommended one there. So yeah, thank you so much, Hayley. That's a really wonderful discussion. I hope everyone listening found it really useful and took lots of great advice and tips from it. And of course, lots and lots of book recommendations, but you can never have too many. And you've got the whole of the summer holiday now to read them. So as I mentioned, we'll be sharing a list of all the resources and books that have been spoken about today in the comments once this video has been shared to the Summer Reading Challenge Facebook page. So please do come back shortly and you'll have a full list of everything mentioned there. And don't forget, whether you work in a school or a library, or if you're a trainee teacher, you can sign up to the Teachers Reading Challenge at teachersreadingchallenge.org.uk. And we'd love for you to take part in the Share a Read campaign as well, which we're running in partnership with Pearson, which is collating lots of book recommendations from teachers, librarians and children. So I'll link to that below as well. And I think that is everything for this afternoon. So thank you so much, Hayley, and thank you everybody as well for watching us.